It's Wednesday. You know what that means. Time for the Southern California Writers Association Hump Day Book Tour. I'm your host, Maddie Margarita, here with Diana Pardee on tech. Every Wednesday morning, the Southern California Writers Association turns our Facebook page, over to a new writer or a different writer, or in this case, one of our favorite members, Colleen Fliedner. Colleen is an award-winning author, journalist, and historian. She's written 4 nonfiction books, radio and TV commercials, screenplays, and hundreds of articles for newspapers, magazines, and online publications. Her book, In the Shadows of War, Spies, Love in the Lusitania, I got that right, is a historical fiction novel. And that was her or most recently released book before her current book. Is that correct, Colleen?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And her current book is Fascinating True Tales from Old California: Crooked Con Men, eccentric immigrants, and fearless females who shaped the Golden State. Well, that gives everybody some idea of what they're in for. But this is such an interesting grouping of stories, and you have such an interesting history and insight into these stories. So with all the stories that people have heard and are out there, how did you pick the stories that you decided to include in this anthology or this collection?
Oh, it was really hard. There's so many to choose from. And I decided, after doing probably about 75 of them, I knew I would have to narrow down the page count for the publisher. And it was picking and choosing. And I was trying to do kind of a cross section of more humorous and light stories versus those stories which were kind of tragic, like Lola Montez and Jane Stanford of Stanford University, some mysteries, some rags to riches, to rags. So it's just a little of everything.
You know, what surprised me is, I think, when you think about the Wild West and the Old West here in California, and some of the characters that were out there, you think a lot of the male characters that were out there, but there are a lot of female characters too. Some women who left behind everything that was comfortable and that they knew, and came to California and made a life. So what were some of the characters? I mean, what was your favorite character in the story? And what was your favorite story about one of those types of strong women that you didn't include?
Well, Ina Coolbrith was one of my favorites, and she held a secret most of her life. And she was a brilliant writer and California's first poet laureate. But she had a lot of ups and downs and tragedies. And even after she died, she didn't even receive a proper respect, I guess you would say, where people knew who she was, and she was forgotten for quite a while. And I wanted people to know her story. And then so she would have been maybe one of my favorite women. Lola Montez was more of a kind of a fun story where she did her spider dances and reinvented herself. Yeah. And married, I guess he would have been the ruler of Bavaria, King Ludwig I, and was his consort, and brought about his ruin in his own country. And that was a fascinating story. And then how at the very end she died very young. And then the pirate story, I love that. And that's the one I'm going to be doing for several libraries coming up, including, Rancho Santa Margarita on May 20th. And that's about the pirate attack in Monterey, and Bouchard, who sailed his ships down into Dana Point Harbor, and then they pillaged the little town of San Juan Capistrano and robbed everything out of the mission. And so I've done a lot of work on rounding out pictures to go with that lecture, and found the ruins of the Rancho that was in Trabuco Canyon just a couple of weeks ago, and took a picture of the last standing wall there, where the residents of San Juan Capistrano scrambled when they got word that there was going to be a pirate attack, and the pirate did burn the town. So anyway, I have so many, it's just hard to choose.
Well, I think people, when they read this, these stories are so fully researched and fully fleshed out. It almost reads as if you were there.
Well,
So,
thank you.
so can we talk a little bit about your history? What brought you to this point? Why you write what you write, and how you write?
Oh boy. Well, I've been writing about California my whole life and writing my whole life. I tried to do a novel when I was 13, and my dad bought me a typewriter, my first typewriter when I was 13, and it was a narrative, captive narrative that they called them, a little girl being taken by the Indians and that kind of thing. Um, but I've always loved history. I don't know why. My parents weren't into that or anything. And that was my major in college. And when I was working at Cal State Long Beach, I was a graduate student at that time, and they had already hired me as a research assistant. And so after I graduated and I continued on there working, doing oral history interviews, um, big projects about finding oil in Long Beach. Did museum type of programs for Dominguez Hills and Cal State Northridge, and was involved in that whole system for doing their historical research for grants. And then I was hired away from there, and this was my first book, and it is a 100-year history. And it starts, you can see all my tags and stuff because I have to do lectures for the county poor farm, especially. And it evolved from the county poor farm into Rancho Los Amigos Rehabilitation Center, which is one of the major rehabilitation centers in the world now. So it was a 100-year history, and that brought me into doing other writing and Park City, Utah. And I have a bunch of books on the back here that I've done, and lots and lots and lots of articles and some ghostwritten books that I've done. And I just love it. And I knew the history of California so well because I'd done so much with it. And I thought, when during COVID, what can I do? And I gathered a bunch of my favorite stories together, and I have a whole library of California history books, and that's what I did.
So when some of these stories are so great, I don't know how you resist going down that rabbit hole and not writing books about every single one of these stories. I
I
mean,
know.
they're in perfect bite-sized chunks. So you could take this book with you anywhere, if you have a few minutes, if you're waiting before the doctor or you're traveling or whatever. It's the perfect book for that because it's entertaining. And like I said, some of the stories are a little bit longer. But how do you keep from falling in love with some of these topics and characters and
I'm still going down that rabbit hole
are
right
you?
now. Yes, gathering the pictures. I did a story of John Downey years and years ago. I wrote it for a historical magazine. And so as I did it, when you have word counts of 1,200 words or something, they're very short. But having done the Rancho Los Amigos and all of these other stories, I knew I wanted to do more about John Downey. And as I got into it, I started finding his flaws, where he actually bought a rancho on the, not on the auction block, he foreclosed on it, and it was his best friend. And the guy that had owned it up in the Pasadena area, or no, actually that was where Downey was founded. And the guy was on Christmas Eve, and he had children, and he tried to borrow money from Downey to buy Christmas gifts for his children. And Downey instead foreclosed on the rancho. And I think that's the guy that committed suicide. But there are all these things. And then the other thing is with John Downey's wife, there was a terrible train crash. It was the Southern Pacific that came from San Francisco to Los Angeles, and then eventually, to other places. And he was instrumental in having that railroad brought down. But his wife was of Spanish heritage, a lot younger than him. She had been California's youngest first lady. He was the governor back in the Civil War era. And she didn't want to get on the train, and he talked her into it. And she said something bad's going to happen. And indeed it did on their way home to Los Angeles. And it went off the rails up in the Tehachapi area. And she was tangled in the debris and burned to death, burned alive with him. They managed to pull him out. And her body has been lost. her body has been lost. So it's one of my goals is to find out what happened to her. I know she had been in Old Calvary Cemetery in Los Angeles, the oldest one. When that filled up, they moved the bodies out to the new one, which is in East LA now. And John Downey was eventually his body taken up to Colma, the cemetery in Colma. But there's no records of her being taken out of the ground. And there's a high school built there now. I think the high schoolers teams are called the Phantoms or something, because they know that their school was built over the first cemetery and their body's still in there. But so I'm working with a church historian, Catholic church historian, and he's up in Fresno right now going through all of the old documents, seeing if he can locate her. So anyway, rabbit hole time.
I know, I love that. And so I'm always fascinated when I read nonfiction, so many stories, how you craft a story out of tidbits of information, how you organize them into story and decide what's important and what's not important, and stepping back enough to give somebody a true vision of what you're trying to create from all these little details.
Well, I mean, several of them, like Ina Coolbrith, there's one book, and I did talk to the author that had written that book and worked with Bancroft Library up north at Berkeley to gather a lot of the details. And she helped me because she was up there and the library was closed. And so she helped me with a lot of those details. But I mean, you could do a whole book about almost any of these people, and some people have and some people haven't written these stories. So it's trying to condense them. That it's such a trick. It is really hard, and making it so that it flows and yet because you have a page count, a word count, you just have to do your best with it.
One of the interesting things too that I found in these stories is you were able to find details about what was going on around them and people that around them. I mean, I know that takes a tremendous amount of research, but these people lived full lives. How do you decide what's important and what's not important to include? And like you said, there are books about these people and you're writing short stories. So are there certain elements that you feel like you need to include in these stories, or do you take it story by story?
Well, I think it's also, having written fiction where you're trying to find plot points, so to speak, things that would have affected their lives. With Ina Coolbrith, they moved to Los Angeles and she's doing brilliantly and writing poetry, and it's being published, and then she gets pregnant and loses a baby, and then her ex-husband is abusing her and tries to kill her, and those are really important in people's lives. So you don't want to write everyday boring stuff. You want to write the highlights, the things that would have created emotions, the thing, so that you can feel it for them. And I felt really bad for a lot of these people that really had such bad luck. I mean, so many bad things happened to them no matter what they did. So I tried to, balance that out in their stories with, this would be interesting to my reader, and I want them to know this about her, even though she tried to hide the fact that she was one of the offspring, basically, of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon religion. So she did not want people to know that, but I wanted my reading audience to know that because it was important.
Well, and I guess that was a better way of saying what I was saying, is these characters jump off the page. They feel very human, very relatable, quirks and strengths and weaknesses and all
Thank you.
in these different settings. You've done such a wonderful job. Where can people find this book, Colleen?
Well, it's going to be released into bookstores and Target and Walmart and all these places and all over the internet. You can pre-order it now, but it should come out next month.
You must be very excited. How long did it take you to research?
About 2 years. 2 years, all during COVID, and I had researched some of it before that, but luckily I have my library here, so because libraries were closed, I had intended to go up north to the California Historical Society. So when it reopened, that's when I finished everything up, when things started opening up again. And that way I could talk to and communicate with historians and newspapers up north, and places that were not close by. So, and I'm still doing all of that
So what are
to
you
try to
working
put
on now?
together.
What are you working on?
Well, I've got the pirate thing pretty much done, and John Downey, we're doing that, and then I'm trying to decide which things I'm going to talk about up north, so I can do a book tour up there.
Well, that's really exciting. And again, we're going to show this. So it's Fascinating True Tales of Old California. If anybody is interested in kind of going back in time and perusing the lives, peeking in, being a voyeur into the lives of so many interesting people in a very exciting, difficult, adventurous time, this is the perfect book. Thank you, Colleen, for being here. Best of luck going forward and on your new projects as well.
Thank you.
And to everyone else for being here. We appreciate you taking time out of your morning to share, I guess, the work and the efforts of our authors. Hopefully, if you can support them, that would be wonderful, and buy their books. If you are seeing them in libraries or people are lending them to you, take the time, or buying them online. If you can take the time to write a review. Reviews are important to authors as well. So there are lots of different ways you can support your favorite authors. So thank you very much. If you enjoyed today, you can see, please share Colleen's interview. You can see her on YouTube, on the SCWA Writers Online YouTube channel, along with hundreds of other interviews as well. So until next week, please take care, and we will see you soon.